Hello, my friends. Mandy here with a quick invitation for you to join the Patreon for our show. We've recently switched up some of the benefits, including a new monthly workbook to go along with all the incredible content you're getting on the show. It's a quote yourself through grief kind of a vibe, and for only $10 a month, it is a wholly worthy and affordable way to invest in your own healing process without the commitment of a full coaching relationship. Learn more at patreon.com/Mandy Capehart, and of course, the link is in the show notes. Thank you as always for being here. Now let's get into the good stuff. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. You are listening to episode 103, titled Relational Grief and Healing with Cortland Coffey. Recognizing grief in its less common presentations can be really challenging, and often it's easy to overlook. My guest this week is here to share a bit about how he has navigated the shifting landscape of connections and relationships in his life, which have ultimately brought up a lot of grief. Cortland Coffey is a former youth pastor raised in fundamentalist evangelical ideology, and now he is reevaluating the way he shows up in relationship to himself and to others. This is grief work, and although it may not seem so obvious, it deserves the same intention and compassion we would offer to ourselves or others in the wake of a death. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the show. It's Mandy. I am here today with my friend Cortland Coffey. Cortland is a former youth pastor, and he is the current host of the wonderful show, The Thereafter podcast. And they talk about everything in life in the aftermath of leaving a world of faith. And so we found each other on Twitter, and I'm so very grateful you get to know him today. Welcome, Cortland.
Yeah, Mandy, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here and just hang out and get into whatever we get into. So really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited too because, as we were talking about off air, and there's so many different directions that this can go because you are not a grief professional. You're not necessarily someone that sits around and thinks about loss or who has.
I'm like the opposite of that.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yep.
an Enneagram 7.
Yep.
You got to twist my arm to make me have bad feelings.
Oh, sweet friend. That's where we get to decide. And you'll appreciate this as a reframing behavior for the 7s, right? There's no such thing about bad feelings here. We're going to speaking of breaking binary, since that's one of your favorite things to do, we'll just break that binary of good and bad. There's no such thing when it comes to those emotions. So
Love that.
yeah. One of the things I wanted to talk with you about today is just speaking of your Enneagram 7-ness is the vast way that you show up in the world. You have such a invitational presence about you. I remember when we first met in person, your goal was like saying yes to and spending as much time as possible with as many people as possible. And your little Energizer Bunny battery seemed to keep going the whole entire time, which for me, even as an external like people person, I tend to burn out very fast at that level of intentionality. And so I'm curious with your history of what you've done career wise, but also just socially, like bring us up to speed on how you hold space for yourself to exist when you are constantly on that path of drawing people to you, because there's a lot of healing and kindness and compassion in that willingness to bring people in and to spend time with them. But you have to still exist in the midst of that. So how do you like decide that, yes, I'm going to still draw those people in?
I'm definitely, I don't have a good answer. I'm definitely still very much figuring that out. And have been in a period of transition, which was really largely kicked off by COVID and lockdown, because that was the first point in time. Up until that point, I was still largely using social interaction as distraction. It is something that I genuinely enjoy. I love people. I really love getting to know people, meeting people, spending time with people, and being out and being social. Obviously, with lockdown, it was like, oh, we can't do that. It drove me to areas of the internet like Clubhouse, where I met so many wonderful people, and Discord and various online communities where I could experience that social interaction, but it definitely changed the way in which I was able to keep myself distracted with social interaction. And so that was kind of the turning point. And I've been on kind of a journey since then, trying to figure out what time with myself or time just being focused more on myself and not externally focused is like and feels like, and can, how that can benefit me. But I'm definitely still very far from having that figured out.
Mm.
I don't have like a, oh yeah, this is how I figured that out. Because I'm still, I would say, very much in the early stages
Yeah.
of figuring that out.
Well, I think that that's really relatable and important to recognize too, because I mean, if we want to put this in the framework of grief, right? When we recognize, okay, something isn't quite working, let's pivot quickly, like start of COVID, all of my social needs are not being met. I'm going to pivot as quickly and as painlessly as possible to survive. You are now on the other side of that, recognizing, okay, what I did was fine. What I have learned, who I've become, how I've shown up has served me really well. And it's completely reasonable that I've gone through all of these websites and all of these different experiences to try and build a sense of community around me. That is really relatable, I think. And I think you are also among the majority of people who now, a few years into that process, are doing something similarly and saying, well, wait a minute, this wasn't sustainable. It was meaningful and helpful at the front end, but it's not sustainable to continue to pour myself out into these relationships looking for something, when you said it really well when you were like, oh, it's all coming from the external. It really is. So then that just begs the question is, as someone who is now practicing some reflection and internal look, how does that feel? How are you? I mean, how much on a scale of 1 to 10 do you absolutely hate having to be introspective and slow down and disconnect from everyone to do the work?
That number is changing. Definitely used to be a 10. I think we're probably somewhere in the middle now, maybe more like a 5.
Mm.
I think that I'm leaning in and learning to enjoy less socially stimulated time and time with myself, less scheduled time, downtime, and not keeping my calendar just packed full all the time. I think there's an element for me of setting precedent with people relationally that I have had to adjust and realize that, for instance, like I don't like being out late. Like I used to be uh, a big out at the bar, kind of a drunk, but just like being out, and like a lot of relationships that I formed from closing down bars and being out late and being a night person. And like I said, COVID really changed a lot of that for me. And so I found myself in these situations now where I'm like, I want to be in bed at 8 o'clock on a Friday night. I had a friend text me at like 9:30 the other night and was like, come out to this like local bar that, we go to. And I was like, there's no way that I'm putting pants on. Like, it's like, there's no way that's going to happen. And I think to some extent it's been an adjustment of like, there are some people who needed or wanted me to be that person, and
Sure.
I can't be that person in some contexts, and that's okay, right? And just like accepting that maybe part of not wanting to, sit at home and read and do a puzzle or whatever I do these days more often than not wasn't because I didn't want to be doing that or didn't enjoy it, but because I felt that I had set an expectation that I would be there. And there also is just a ton of payoff from that. Right? Like we think about like the way in which we get engage online in social media spaces, like there is relational connection that you get when you live on Twitter, right? Like
Mhm.
when you are replying quickly and interacting with content that people are putting on social media, you are able to connect in a real-time way that you're not if you just like schedule out 10 minutes to get on Twitter at the end of the night,
Right.
right? Like you're just not going to have the same experience. And so it's like trying to balance out for me in all of these areas, like, okay, like there is something that I'm going to miss out if I'm not engaging in this way, but is that worthwhile? Like, is it worth it to miss out on that for what I could benefit from maybe doing something a different way? And like I said, I go back and forth. There are days I live on Twitter, and there are days that I don't. And I think realizing that there really is real loss there. There is something that you lose by, there are conversations that happen at the bar at 1 a.m. that can be really wonderful and you
Yeah.
can have some great experiences. And on the other side of that, there are things that happen at 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning that you never get to experience if you're at the bar at 1 a.m. on Friday night, you know?
Yeah. I think that's a really important distinction to recognize. And going back to your seven, like sevens are really good at recognizing the positives very quickly, because they're looking for them, right? But it's a skill as well for people who are grieving to move themselves out of focusing on what they're losing and looking instead at what they're gaining and being able to exchange that demand from others, that external expectation that you're meeting for someone else's benefit. Yes, you gain from it as well, but really the benefit is not as great as it would be if you were meeting your own internal expectation. I love that. What do you think has changed as you've started to disappoint people and fail to meet their expectations?
I think like what one thing that I've realized is that a lot of the expectations are self-imposed. People are really chill about when you say like, hey, I need space, or hey, I'm not able to, my social battery is low or whatever. I've been doing that a lot recently as I've been in like a period of kind of burnout. And you know things like even the podcast, right? Like we're on this weird mid-season break where we've pretty much wrapped up what we wanted to do in season 3, and we don't want to fully take a break because Megan and I still love hanging out, and I do want to record episodes. Sometimes recording an episode is fun and really fulfilling, and so we're kind of sometimes we're recording, some weeks we're taking off, we're kind of letting ourselves do whatever like we can do. And there's always this pressure, like you have to create, you need to tweet, you need to post, you need to, in general, there is this expectation you set when you're putting content out or you're running Discord servers or various different things where you're like, I need to be present, I need to be creating, I need to be doing this stuff. I think in a lot of ways there's like an internal like people are going to forget about me.
Mm,
Maybe it kind of connects to some abandonment stuff that I have as like, well, if I'm not present in front of people, they're going to forget about me.
mm,
And I don't find that to be super true. I don't think that people actually are as upset when I can't meet some expectation that I've kind of put on myself
mhm,
in a relational exchange. I also think that a lot of it ties into how I exist in the world and kind of projecting that onto other people. I'm very much a type of person that if you're not in front of me, I forget about you. Which sounds awful, but that's how my brain works. It's like if I don't, I use the penned text thing in my iMessage. I use it in Twitter DMs. I'm regularly penning people up into that space because I'm like, if I don't see your face, then I'm going to forget to talk to you. And it could be months before I remember, oh, I really like that person. I should send them a message or whatever. Um, and I realize that not everyone is that way. And sometimes I project that onto other people. Like I need to stay like my face needs to stay in front of people or else they're gonna forget about me. But that's not the reality.
I think what you're describing is a lot of really beautiful embodiment work about the truth of who you are and where you show up in the world and what you need to maintain a healthy presence for yourself over intending a healthy presence for others. And that's a really, really important skill that a lot of times we don't see. When someone is actively grieving, the first thing they do is some version of isolate and take care of myself only, or externalize and take care of others. I was just talking to someone the other day who was expressing that they were grieving a loss, very fresh within a couple of weeks. And their only response was how they observed everyone they knew that was also grieving that loss and what they were going through. They had nothing to say about their own process. And what I found interesting about that was just the same thing. Like, we have a huge responsibility to learn who we are and what we really need. But we can't necessarily do that if we're going into those average spaces where we just show up, we feel affirmed and solidified, we feel seen, no matter if it's really a helpful feeling, like a really positive experience, or if it's just kind of like a, okay, well, that was not great, but it was better than being alone kind of an experience. But it sounds like pulling back from those incredibly active, really engaged, always present person that you are, being able to soften that, it sounds like it's bringing you into a really like newly introspective space.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think realizing that there's a lot of aspects of like my personality and who I am and how I interact with people that often gets like characterized really kind of positively or selflessly, but in many cases like through further introspection it is like very self-serving to the extent of like I'm engaging oftentimes relationally for the dopamine hit, right?
Yeah.
Like I do care about people and I love people, but I am oftentimes using these as, like the way we use social media. We're using these as dopamine delivery systems.
Mhm.
And so whether it's the news feed or the group chat or dating apps or whatever it might be, it is like, oh, I need a hit of whatever that is. And so I'm going to get on and swipe on the dating app, or I'm going to get on and have a glass of wine and reply to 40 Instagram stories because that will create a dopamine hit for me to have that engagement. And so I think I'm trying to figure out like, okay, how do I balance those two realities
Mhm.
and not moralize that behavior, because to some extent like doing something that brings you happiness is not a bad thing. We don't have to go, my fundamentalist evangelical mind automatically goes like, I'm doing this for pleasure, it can't be good. uh but like realizing that it's like, oh yes, I'm doing this for pleasure, and I'm creating patterns to some extent with this behavior that I want to at least just be aware of, right? I want to have some like presence in that to go like, okay, how am I doing this in a way that's going to be sustainable for me and also is going to be a situation where I don't create a dependency from somebody else, and then let them down, which is
Mhm.
obviously a huge fear.
Yeah. I think the way that you show up and communicate too about what you're doing and what you're experiencing is obviously a skill. it's something you have to develop. No one is just naturally a really good communicator to be able to say, "Hey, I don't want to let you down. So I need you to have healthy expectations of what you're going to get from me in this relationship." But it can also be certainly exhausting for you to then think, "Oh, I have to offer that to every single person I meet so that I'm not disappointing them." When grief conversations, but even just life transitions activate grief within people, that groundwork that they have, like you were saying about your fundamentalist evangelical background, right? A lot of people who listen to the show share that kind of a background as well. And that will be the thing that comes to the forefront to say, well, what about this principle, or a scripture will come to mind, and they're really frozen and not sure how to process and not sure what to do next, because their belief system is also a source of grief, or it's also in flux. And so, how have you? I know it's been quite some time that you've been working through that perspective, but how have you seen that show up for you? And how do you support yourself as you recognize, that's not really a present day Cortland perspective?
Yeah. So I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, as well as in like our spaces and some other places online. But I think one of the biggest things that I've had to keep coming back to in my, therapy journey and in kind of like my relationship journey, specifically with like life partners and my spouse and that sort of thing, is that there was so much of a mindset of permanence
Mm,
that was a big part of the ideology that I grew up in, right? You have this narrative around being saved, around being a new creation, around getting engaged or getting married or going into ministry, or all these various points along the story that are framed in this name change type of moment, right? It's like the whole kind of narrative around the fundamental biblical ideology that I grew up in was one of linear permanence that, was very clearly defined and would be forever, right? These things, eternal realities, were a big part of the way in which I saw the world. And so I think that realizing that no, things aren't linear, things aren't permanent, things aren't eternal, that they're much more circular, they're much more seasonal and rhythmic. And obviously there's a ton of that in scripture, right? About rhythm and about balance and life, especially in Jewish scripture. We see that really consistently through a lot of the imagery and a lot of the narrative. But the way in which obviously I was taught the, Western Protestant Christian fundamentalist bootstrap type of Christianity, uh, it set me up to not be able to go, oh, things can change and change back and change again, whether it's relationship dynamics or whether it's my personal rhythms for life, or whether it's my sexuality or my gender, or the way in which my parasocial relationships are existing. All of these things can be evolving, and not evolving in a linear escalation, right?
mm-hmm.
Like we can, I've had relationships that have seen seasons of it's very easy for me to intellectualize and
Mhm.
theorize on these types of things. And I love to think about that, the way in which we construct our perspective on these systems and structures and habits and rhythms and ideologies and theories, et cetera, et cetera. I think I think one of the things that has been difficult for me in the work of reckoning with change, which I think correlates well with grief, uh, is the feeling or emotional side. And primarily, I think one of the main reasons for that is how feelings and emotions were weaponized and used so effectively for control and for manipulation and abuse. So even for me, like one of the things that I have been thinking a lot about is uh anger. You know, people will often be like, you know, people on the internet especially can be angry. Uh and a lot of times people will again kind of like uh uh point out something about me in like a complimentary lens, like compliment, like you just don't get angry, you're just not upset, like,
Mhm.
and I'm not, but I'm mostly not because I'm some sort of like saint, but
Mhm.
more so that anger has been used so much to motivate
Mhm.
me in a past life to do so many terrible things,
Mhm.
and manipulated me and etc. that I've shut off lots of those parts, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
it's it's not that I am like, oh, I'm not going to get angry, uh, because I'm just not angry. I just like literally have shut off that portion of myself in
Yeah.
order to be able to effectively uh, protect myself,
Yep. Yeah.
right? And so as I talk about a lot of these things that I'm experiencing, obviously I have thought through them, but I do and still very much struggle to feel them or embody them, as you say, in terms of the actual like emotional experience.
Yeah. It's a good question just because it's something that I think most people will say because you're right. Anger is easily dismissed as a negative emotion, as a dangerous emotion, as a the gateway into violence, and that's true to a degree. If you are left untethered and you are given all of the reasons in the world to grow in hatred, then yeah, anger can be a really dangerous place to exist. But the reality is, it's a secondary emotion that protects us from feeling the more tender emotions and the ways that we really truly have need that's going unmet. So a lot of the times with what you're talking about, just to like define it a little more clearly, thoughts can lead to emotions and feelings are more physical manifestations. And a lot of times people will conflate emotion and feeling together. There's some similarities, but they're different. So if you think about like tired, I can feel tired in my body, but really it doesn't quite describe the emotion we're feeling. Maybe we're feeling really emotionally just empty, right? Uh, so that's kind of where you start with it. But the idea of learning to embody your emotions and recognize how to move through them in a way that's not fearful, in a way that's not avoiding them because they're dangerous or we've been told that they're unsafe, is a couple of different I mean, there's quite a few practices, but one that I really like is by getting really still and quiet and doing a body scan and bringing your thoughts to the tip of your toes and waiting and allowing yourself to ask your body the question, what do you need me to know? And you scan slowly up your body. And instead of thinking of a response, you wait. And I know that can be a really confusing concept for people. Like, well, what do you mean? Don't think of a response, wait for a response. Until you have experienced it, it can be confusing. The moment you experience a response from your body, your your mind like softens in totality. Your whole brain goes, "Oh my God, that's what that feels like. That's what that experience is," because it becomes something that you didn't quite think of, that you realize, "I couldn't have thought of that myself." Have you ever read your own writing and you go back and you're like, "Who said that? That's brilliant. Wait a minute, I said that? That was me?" It's a
Yeah,
moment like
all the
that.
time.
Yeah.
I don't remember like the majority of things that I say are right. So yeah, all the time.
Yeah, totally. That was me. I'm so wisdomous. Um, yeah. So I think part of it is that. Part of it is that embodiment practice of truly deciding I'm going to connect in the present moment to my body when the body has been unsafe, when it has been harmed, when it has been framed as a dangerous experience or a dangerous part of our human life. That's a really terrifying prospect. So I definitely don't recommend somatic embodiment practice for anyone that has experienced unsafeness in their body to do it alone. Always with a professional. Be with someone that you can trust, that you can drop your guard, that you know you are safe with. Because it can bring up a lot of really scary physical memories. That's what trauma does. We relive the thing we're going through. Um, and then there's some other things you can do, again, with professionals. I don't really think people therapizing themselves is a smart way to go about it, but, another thing that I have found people to be very positively responding to is internal family systems therapy, which is just that idea that all of your parts belong. All of the younger parts of you were doing what you said, hiding, trying to survive, doing the best that they could with what they had at the time, and that had to be enough. But now that we are older and we are in places of security, we can have conversations, again, asking ourselves to pause instead of thinking of a response and just saying like, "Okay, little self, like, what have you got for me? What did I miss? How can I create safety for you so that you're not fighting to protect me or yourself anymore? You can relax, know that I've got you, and that you can focus on other things, other opportunities for wellness in our life, in our sense of the whole." Does that answer your
Yeah.
question?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, it's definitely something that I am just beginning to, obviously in my personal therapy journey
Mhm.
and in the way I've been navigating, you know, my community, something
Mhm.
I'm just beginning to really think about and work on. Um, so yeah, it's helpful for sure.
I'm curious how you would take the idea of this rhythm and bringing connection to people with the vastness of your social network. Like you have so many people that you would consider very close to you, but it's not necessarily sustainable. I mean, especially to the high degree that you want to offer to every person, for more than like three or four people. So, how do you, as someone who is so loving and is so connected, how do you navigate knowing these relationships are going to go into rhythms that maybe dip when I'm really not expecting it or really not interested in it dipping? How do you support that relationship and yourself through that?
Yeah, I mean the short answer is I have no idea. The longer answer, which involves like maybe like my theories, or a little bit in terms of what I've began to experience, is that uh, I think it has to do with, for me, being able to communicate
Mm,
what my intention, desire, expectation, etc. is in social interactions, and also realize that if I don't communicate those things,
mhm,
and that other party doesn't communicate those things, that I need to not fill in those gaps with something. So being very intentional to say, if I need clarity about what the expectation or what someone else's bandwidth, interest, etc. might be, then I need to ask. And if I am feeling a need, desire, and expectation, I need to be able to say that and communicate that to that person, or even largely to that platform or network that I'm a part of. Polyamory has been super helpful for me in that language to talk about connection and enmeshment that I think I didn't really have accessible to me in my pre-polyamory existence. And relationship anarchy and kind of the theory around relationship anarchy has been really helpful for me too. I think I said this at the meetup in Portland when we were discussing, I think non-monogamy maybe came up for a moment. We were talking and I had said how if somebody says like, hey, like, you know, you're talking to me like we're dating, I would be like, yeah, like kind of we are. Like anyone in relationship to me is some form of relationship that
Sure.
we have either talked about or we haven't talked about. Maybe somebody, I went on a date with somebody not too long ago and they were talking about their understanding of this. And they said, you know, me and a person across the world who don't know each other are in relationship. Like just the nature of our relationship is that we don't know each other and we don't talk, right? But that is a state of relationship.
Yes, it is.
And so thinking about all of these intersecting relationships as valid points of connection to define, rather than this idea that like, oh, I have these 3 relationships that I've well defined. Maybe it's a spouse and a best friend and a best work friend or whatever, that many people might have these more defined relationships. And then all the other soccer moms or the other parents at the school or the people on Instagram or the people in the Discord server they're a part of or fellow people, you know, in, you know, a dance troupe that they, you know, hang out with on, you know, every other weekend or whatever it might be. All of those other relationships don't get definition. And it's almost weird to talk about. It's like, it feels uncomfortable at first to start going like, hey, what is your, you know, what are your boundaries? What are your expectations? What are your desires in this point of connection that we have? But trying to normalize that to whatever extent I can, right? There are some times where relationships are just very casual, and that's okay. But I find that for me, I find myself in positions of more intimacy and deeper connection with people than other people tend to. It's not uncommon for me to meet someone and within a couple hours of talking, having them telling me things that they're like, I've never really told anyone this. And they're opening up to me in these ways and creating, I don't know what it is about me that finds myself in those situations, but I do find myself in that situation a lot. So I'm trying to be more aware of that and go like, okay, what is this experience like for them? And how can I communicate what I'm experiencing and ask them more directly what they're experiencing in this moment to avoid hurt? Because I think that's the main thing that I want to avoid is this sense of hurt and loss and pain that I saw so many people go through when they lost faith communities. And so when I've been navigating post-faith spaces, especially, I really want to be cognizant of what dynamics might be at play.
Yeah, I think that goes back to just earlier when I said, just pointed out what great space you hold for people to be people, to really be honest and just show up exactly as they are, and that you have very few expectations on who they are. The fear of emotional enmeshment, I think, that you mentioned with that perspective comes from a complete lack of recognition of how vast humanity is and how it works. And certainly I can relate to that out of, and that's a huge gift that you have.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that the correlation between enmeshment and closeness isn't always, it doesn't correlate always, right?
Right.
Like there are people I have heavy enmeshment with that I don't have deep intimacy with,
Sure.
right? Coworkers,
Yeah.
for instance, right? There are people that I have high levels of intimacy with that I have lower levels or almost no level of enmeshment with. And so I think that there is so much about relational scripts that we socially depend on to kind of
Mhm.
fill in the gaps, but unexamined tend to, you know, put us in situations where we're not really having the best experience in a relationship that we could be having
Yeah.
because we're depending on this kind of unwritten script to inform us about the relationship dynamic. And again, I think that unlearning that and realizing like, oh, okay, I can speak up, I can ask questions, I can uh, define things in relational dynamics, and also I don't have to be entirely responsible for how other people are going to use their subconscious scripts to relate to our dynamic or whatever dynamics happening. I can be as sensitive as I can.
Right.
I had a conversation with a friend the other day who had gotten into a situation. They're a very flirtatious person. They're a very touchy feely person, and they're femme, and there was a person who was like, well, you know, upset because they were like, you've led me on and I thought you had
Mhm.
different interests than you had. And I was like, did that person ever ask? Oh no, they never asked. Did they ever state their intent? No, they never said. It was all unspoken. And in this particular situation, I was like, societally, we put so much expectation on femme presenting people when it comes to how we assign responsibility for ambiguous
Yeah.
scripts in relationship dynamics, right? You don't hear that as often with mask presenting people or men where it's like, oh, he really, led me on. No, that whole narrative is really based in a lot of very gendered understanding of relationships. And so I just bring that up because I think her, when I was talking to her, letting her off the hook and going like, hey, like, listen, yeah, maybe it would save you some headache to be more clear, but also it's not your responsibility to define your intention with every person you interact with,
Right.
because this is how you interact with people.
Yeah.
And it's an unrealistic expectation to put on you to say, oh no, you're responsible for how this man responded
Perceives. Yeah.
to and perceived this situation. And so yeah, anyway, I just think that examining those scripts and those dynamics is not only helpful for creating more clear and more life-giving dynamics and connections and relationships for us, but it also helps us unlearn a lot of the way in which we've been socialized in possibly negative ways, whether that is, the way things are traditionally gendered or, things having to do with, as a white person, our whiteness, and all of these other things that impact the way we relate together. socially as human beings.
Yeah, it really goes back to that fear of others, fear of being corrupted, fear of sending mixed messages, fear of being unwanted, fear of, I mean, a million different fears of relational experiences that would lead to loss. And as you were talking, I was thinking about how I know some people, of course, who will say, well, I don't say I love you to most people because it's really complicated. And I respect that wholeheartedly. And that's when I will say, well, can I tell you that I love you? Because I seriously like fall for people left and right. My husband laughs at me all the time. He's like, do you have more people? And I'm like, yeah, I do. People are incredible.
You
I
and me
mean,
both, Mandy.
I know, dude.
Feel it.
I studied anthropology in college as one of my minors because I'm so obsessed with the way that culture works and learning about the way people relate to each other and how they build their societies. And that's one of those things that as I've come out of really recognizing these weird lines we draw in church world in Western culture, and I've just gotten to the point where I'm like, I'm going to make people uncomfortable unintentionally. I already know that. I know that I do anyway, but I know that if I'm honest about, wow, this person is so magical, I just want to like be near them all the time. That is not a bad characteristic. That's okay. That's actually a really beautiful thing that says this person regulates my nervous system in a way that I feel safe around them. And that's the purpose of relationship, not so that we can turn around and procreate or turn a community into a very peaceful, idyllic neighborhood because we all follow the same set of guidelines. No, we're actually creating a better environment because the atmosphere around us has attuned with the people we're with. Attunement is so undervalued socially. And I think because, I mean, I'm sure you can relate to this too, but I just think the church has given us such a stumbling block when it comes to that. We, to your point, feminine presenting people are expected to do a certain thing in order to show up. And that's it. And so
Yeah.
when you have someone saying, but what about attunement? It's not even about deep romantic love. It's about attunement. It's about feeling seen and seeing and being settled and feeling really safe. And I think that that's really, I don't know, that's why defining the relationship in every friendship you get that goes beyond an acquaintanceship is really valuable. And that too it's a rhythm you have to get into that you have to learn and practice with people who are willing to say, oh, I wouldn't say it like that necessarily, but thank you for bringing it up. And yes, let's talk about it. So
Yeah.
I think that's a great skill.
I think it's in the same way, if I'm thinking about it, the same way that I'm just now learning to be curious about myself in new ways
Yep.
is a way that I have been curious about other people for a long time.
Hmm.
And I think that that is one of the most like productive things we can do in social relationships
Hmm.
is to be curious and to ask questions. I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine a few weeks ago. We were talking about split attraction model and romantic attraction and sexual attraction and aesthetic attraction and all these different things. And uh they said to me, they were like, I feel romantic about trees. Like I feel romantic about like flowers. Like I feel like I have a, and I was like, tell me, that's wild. Tell me more about that. Right. And
Yeah.
just like, I don't think had I not asked questions and been curious, and both of us engaging with curiosity together, like you say something like love, you brought up, saying I love you. You say something like love, or you say something like romance, and we think that we're talking about the same thing, but very often we are maybe talking about very different
Hmm.
experiences.
Hmm.
Uh, and even the way that you talked about feelings and emotions, the way that you gave language to that, as I was listening, I was like, oh yeah, like that is different.
Hmm.
And until we start unpacking some of that, uh, we're missing out on opportunities to be
Hmm.
curious about each other
Yeah.
relationally.
Yeah. And I think that that's the whole purpose of this is how do we show up compassionately for where we're at and curious about where we're heading, both with ourselves and with others. And to put a fine point on it, just to like wrap this up, like that's the whole purpose of grief work too, is you are always becoming, you are in process until the day you stop breathing. And who knows after that, even if there's more. So
Yeah.
I'm not the one to answer that. So if I can frame my life in the way I approach loss, love, relationships, everything with that sense of wonder and reverence to a degree, then the things that seem terrifying and devastating and overwhelming to the point of death are they lose their teeth, you know? It softens a lot. So,
I love that.
Cortland, I loved this conversation. I loved
Yes.
everything about it. And I'm so grateful that you made space to be with me today. Everybody that's listening, you need to go subscribe to the Thereafter podcast so you can hear Cortland and Meg. They're great. Meg was on the show. Ooh, maybe like episode 10, 13. You should go back and listen to her episode 2. And a little shout out for our buddy. That'll be fun.
Yeah, I believe it is still in the link tree. We have links to like different podcasts that Megan and I have done on all of the Thereafter socials. So if you go into one of our Thereafter socials or go to thereafterpod.com, it takes you to our link tree and you'll find a link to that interview that Megan did on this podcast.
Well, Cortland, I hope you have a fabulous time introverting and puzzling and processing because you're really wonderful. And I hope you know that.
Thank you. You are wonderful as well. And I will. Absolutely. I've done, I think, 8 puzzles this year. So nice. I'm loving every moment of it.
You have some Abraham Piper puzzles yet?
I do not have a Blue Kazoo puzzle, but I've got several of his puzzles in my eye.
Okay.
So I will at some point.
Thank you for listening to episode 103 of Restorative Grief. Cortland's approach to relationships with a lens of curiosity, compassion, and communication is so underrated. Learning how to DTR, define the relationship, with friendships is crucial. It allows for clarity and understanding, not to mention is a form of positive loss aversion for that relationship down the road. No one wants to exist in relationships full of regret and anxiety, so I hope you can take something from the relational modeling Cortland offered us with his story. If this is your first time listening to the show, I want to thank you for showing up and investing in this grief community and in yourself. Your very presence as a listener helps others find what they need when they are also grieving. Learn more about the offerings from Restorative Grief Coaching at mandykpart.com, where you can become a patron, read transcripts and other essays from the show, and connect with me if you're interested in working together or just have questions. Remember to subscribe to the podcast and leave a shiny 5-star review. They're my favorites. And consider sharing this episode with someone you have a trusted attunement with, because there's no time like the present to start practicing. And as always, one last thing before we go. Please remember, the only solution for grief is to do the work of grieving. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.